We need to have a very serious, very uncomfortable, and completely honest conversation about something that has surfaced from the Indiana Fever's recent game against the Portland Fire, because what has been captured on camera and is now circulating across social media platforms with rapidly increasing momentum is not just another entry in the season-long documentation of this franchise's organizational dysfunction. It is something qualitatively different. It directly and specifically contradicts the carefully managed public narrative that the Indiana Fever organization constructed in the days immediately preceding this footage's emergence. And it does so in a way that the organizational communications infrastructure that has been managing this story all season is not equipped to address through the tools it has been deploying. Let us start with the context that makes this moment so significant, because context is the framework through which everything else must be understood. In the days before this footage surfaced, there was visible and deliberate organizational image management happening around the relationship between Stephanie White and Caitlin Clark. Footage was specifically circulated showing the two of them together on the sideline in relaxed, friendly interactions, body language communicating comfort, mutual ease, and positive professional rapport. The kind of sideline imagery that says everything between these two people is functionally healthy, regardless of what external observers might be speculating. Fist bumps, laughter, casual engagement that signals the working relationship is exactly what a franchise coaching its most important player needs it to be. Stephanie White also appeared on a radio program in this same window and described her relationship with Clark in explicitly warm terms. Buddy-buddy was the characterization that circulated from that interview, framing the two of them as genuinely close professional partners with a working dynamic built on trust, mutual respect, and shared competitive purpose. The organizational message embedded in all of this was deliberate and specific. Whatever concerns have been raised throughout this entire season about the coaching staff's management of the franchise player, the substitution decisions, the rhythm disruptions, the sideline interactions that Clark has visibly responded to with discomfort, the documented organizational tensions, the foundational coaching relationship at the center of it all is healthy. The critics are misreading professional friction as something more fundamentally problematic. The buddy-buddy imagery and the radio interview together said, "There is nothing wrong here that your concerns reflect accurately." That narrative has now been directly challenged by camera footage that tells a starkly different story, and the challenge is not subtle or subject to interpretive debate. It is visible in the footage itself, frame by frame. The footage, captured on camera during the Portland Fire game and now spreading rapidly with the kind of velocity that matters in the digital media environment, shows Stephanie White engaged in an animated, physically intense sideline exchange with Caitlin Clark. Let us be precise about what the footage appears to show, because precision matters in situations of this kind, and responsible reporting requires distinguishing between what is observed and what is inferred. The body language in this footage is not the body language of a coach delivering calm, situational, instructional feedback to a player in a routine game management moment. The intensity visible in the exchange, the physical posture, the apparent forcefulness of the communication, Clark's visible response, which observers are describing as raised hands, and a head shake carrying the body language of someone responding to something directed at them with considerable emotional weight, and White's apparent behavior immediately following the exchange, which observers are characterizing as a visible awareness that cameras might be present, followed by a visible effort to modulate her composure after registering that awareness. All of this is what the footage contains. What observers are saying they are seeing is a head coach directing intense confrontational communication at her franchise player on the sideline in a live game situation, followed by a substitution removing that player from the floor. And critically, that substitution, Clark out, Raven Johnson in, occurred in the direct aftermath of this sideline exchange. The sequence from confrontation to benching is what makes this footage consequential beyond the interpersonal dimension it captures. Because the competitive context surrounding this exchange is the part of the story that connects everything and makes the accountability dimension impossible to avoid. The Indiana Fever had just surrendered a 13-2 run. The game had turned against Indiana in a decisive and damaging sustained stretch that fundamentally altered the competitive situation from what it had been earlier in the game. And the question that reasonable observers are now asking, whether the intense communication directed at Clark was related to the defensive breakdown or competitive collapse that produced that run, is a question that the competitive record answers with uncomfortable and specific clarity. Clark had been removed from the game in the opening minutes of the first quarter before that run developed, and while Indiana had a lead. She was sitting on the bench during the window when the 13-2 swing occurred, the competitive structure that Indiana had been operating within while Clark was on the floor. She had been active and productive in her brief time on the floor. The offense was generating. The team had a lead, was the structure that collapsed during her bench absence. The 13-2 run was built by the opposing team against Indiana's lineup without Clark in it. And the footage now circulating appears to document a coaching staff responding to the consequences of its own substitution decision by directing the intensity of that response at the player rather than inward at the decision itself. Let that sequence be stated in full and with complete precision, because it is the foundation from which every other element of this conversation flows. White removes Clark from the game in the early going, while Indiana leads and Clark is producing. Indiana surrenders a 13-2 run while Clark sits on the bench. The footage appears to capture White engaging Clark in an intense sideline confrontation. Clark responds with raised hands and visible body language that observers are reading as resistance to what is being directed at her. White substitutes Clark out of the game again in favor of Raven Johnson. Clark finishes this game with 22 minutes played and 6 points. Raven Johnson plays 10 minutes and produces 3 points. This sequence, from the first quarter substitution to the sideline exchange to the second benching to the final minutes and points totals, is a complete and documented account of how a coaching staff managed its most important player in a game Indiana ended up losing badly to an expansion franchise. And the footage that has surfaced sits at the center of it as visual evidence of what the sideline environment between this head coach and this franchise player actually looked like in a real competitive live game moment, rather than in the carefully curated footage circulated for public consumption days earlier. The PR dimension of this situation demands direct examination because it illuminates something critically important about how this organization has been managing the public narrative around the coaching relationship throughout this entire season. When footage of Clark and White appearing cordial on the sideline was specifically circulated in the days preceding this game, observers who have been tracking this situation closely characterized it as organizational image management designed to address the growing and well-documented public perception that the coaching relationship was strained. The buddy-buddy radio interview from White reinforced that characterization. The combined organizational message was deliberate. The concerns being raised publicly about the dynamic between Clark and her head coach were overblown. The relationship was genuinely positive, and external observers were misreading competitive friction as something more fundamentally problematic. The footage that has now emerged appears to contradict that message directly. And the specific timing, the buddy-buddy interview and friendly sideline footage circulated in the dinner. A run of 13-2 surrendered while she sat on the bench. Sideline footage now circulating that contradicts the buddy-buddy narrative publicly constructed days before it was captured. A fan community that has organized formal resistance movements, driven the lowest attended game of Clark's entire era, and watched secondary market ticket prices collapse to levels that found no buyers at any price. Every thread of this season connects. The commercial decline connects to the fan trust erosion. The fan trust erosion connects to the organizational decisions that produced it. The organizational decisions connect to the coaching philosophy that has mismanaged Clark's minutes and rhythm throughout the season. The coaching philosophy connects to the sideline exchanges that cameras have been capturing with increasing frequency. And those sideline exchanges now include footage that directly challenges the organizational narrative that was being publicly constructed just days before the camera captured what it captured. The Indiana Fever's leadership needs to understand with complete clarity that image management is not an adequate. Continue the image management approach that this footage has comprehensively undermined. Those are the two available paths, and which one the Indiana Fever organization chooses in the coming days will tell its fan base, its commercial partners, and everyone investing in the future of women's professional basketball everything they need to know about whether this franchise has finally grasped what this moment requires of it.